Uh, okay. Kimball is having an issue similar to Mark joining. Oh, there we are. Okay. Okay, we are all on board, Lance.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us in our informal little Zoom gathering to provide an update on how things are progressing with our trial Winter Atlas. Um, so this meeting is going to be different from the regular webinars that we have. It really is informal, and you are we can see who's on here, and we can also unmute ourselves to say things. Although in general, if you're not saying something, we prefer that you stay muted just in case there's, I don't know, some noise in the background or the dog barks or something like that. Um, so what we're going to do is we're going to kind of go over where things are with the trial Winter Atlas. So let me start bringing that up. Let's see, and that should have brought up a PowerPoint, and this should start the PowerPoint.
Yeah, we see it fine, or at least I see it fine.
Okay. All right. So I'm gonna go over a little bit at the beginning about what we're doing and why we're doing it, just in case there are folks who weren't able to join us during our previous meetings, and then we'll kind of launch into where things stand. So um, let's see. There we go. So the basic idea here is that we are doing a test winter bird atlas this winter. And we say test because we're just trying to do a small number of grids across Los Angeles County. And it's basically in preparation for doing a full up atlas in the future, perhaps in three years or so. Um, and so we want to understand how to do this with Ebird, which we didn't do with the Los Angeles County Breeding Bird Atlas in the late 1990s. And also, we didn't do a winter atlas in the 1990s. That was a breeding bird atlas. And so we want to get some experience with some of the protocols, the amount of time that we should require, and some of the issues associated with doing this. And so we're doing a test run this winter with 13 blocks. So 13 is a small fraction of the total number of blocks in Los Angeles County, and I'll show you a map of that in a couple of minutes. So you'll see. So, so yeah, basically, why do it now? Well, we're hoping in a few years to do a full up winter and breeding bird atlas, and we want, as I say, we want to expand this relative to the previous LA County atlas by including a winter survey. We have a website online. The easiest way to find it, if you haven't already, is to go to labirders.org. And then up in the upper right, there's a section called Science. If you click on that, it'll bring up a couple of options. And one of those is the Winter Atlas. And I have the full um, web address down here at the bottom. You don't have to memorize the web atlas. You can just go to labirders.org and look for Science, and then you'll get there. So the Los Angeles County Breeding Bird Atlas, published by Allen et al. In 2016, um, divided Los Angeles County into 12 broad regions that are shown in the figure here on the left. And this is taken straight from the book, Allen et al., which I also want to point out that this was all organized and published by the Los Angeles Audubon Society, with a lot of contributions from people all over the area. So there were 12 different regions. If you look more closely over here on the right, these are three-letter abbreviations for the U.S. Geological Survey's 7.5-minute topo quadrangles, for the ones that include, at least partially, are in Los Angeles County or completely within Los Angeles County. So some of these, for example, just to tell you what they are, like PAS, that's Pasadena; MTW, that's Mount Wilson, and so forth. And we'll say more about those in a moment. So what we're doing for this trial atlas, one of the things is Kimball, Garrett, and I, but mostly Kimball, selected 13 um, blocks, each one of which is 1/6 the size of one of these larger USGS topo quadrangles. And we selected 13 blocks that were spread out over most of the 12 regions that are shown here on the left. The only exception was region number 8. But so we had blocks in all the other ones. In fact, a couple of the blocks, other regions, region 5 and region 2, we had 2 blocks. So the actual blocks themselves are shown here with purple rectangles and also with the 3-letter abbreviations. HIV here stands for High Vista, LAE for Lancaster East, and we'll go through those in a moment. The convention, such as CE, CW, NW, and so forth, that indicates which part of that 7.5 arc minute USGS topo quad we're referring to. So NW means the northwest corner, NE northeast, CE center east, CW center west, SW southwest, and SE southeast. That's different from from the notation that appears in the Atlas book itself, from the first breeding bird atlas for LA County, where it used a system of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The NW, CW, and so forth notation is one that's widely used in breeding bird atlases that are being supported by Ebird, and as a result, we've decided to adopt this. So again, the different blocks are highlighted here in purple rectangles, and as I mentioned, they cover a broad range of habitats and most of those 12 regions that I showed in the previous slide. So for example, the High Vista block here, High Vista Center East, that's in the high desert in the Antelope Valley over near the San Bernardino County line. We have one in here in Lancaster that includes some suburban habitat plus some desert habitat. Liebre Mountain Northwest, that's montane habitat, also with some open grasslands. And it's different from all the other habitats because it has gray pines and it has black oak, and those extensive grasslands, which we don't see in any of the other blocks. So basically the different blocks sample different habitats across the county. There's another mountain block here in Crystal Lake. That's the one that covers the highest elevations. There's one little peak there that gets up to just over 8,000 feet, just north of South Mount Hawkins. Pacifico Mountain Northwest right here. That one includes an area that burned in the Bobcat fire, but it also includes, in addition to some desert creosote bushes, it also includes some pinyon pines. Many of those burned, but there are still some in there that are alive. This is another mountain block over here, San Fernando Northeast. That includes the Bear Divide area where there's considerable interest due to the migration that's going on there in the spring, and so forth. Kimball chose the majority of these blocks in part because they're places that don't already get a lot of coverage in Ebird and places where birders don't tend to spend much time. There are 2 exceptions to that. The Pasadena block here includes the Caltech campus, and in particular, it includes the Lower Arroyo Park, where there are a lot of Ebird lists. That's a very popular place, especially this winter because there are Lewis's woodpeckers there. And down in Long Beach, there are several hotspots, Ebird hotspots, that have hundreds of Ebird checklists. Hartwell Park is partially in that block. Signal Hill is another one. There are a couple of others there. I'm drawing a blank on their names, but they're places where there are a lot of Ebird lists, and there have been some rare birds there recently that are attracting attention, like a chestnut-sided warbler, for example. And there have been some other ones too. So over here on the right, I spelled out the names of each of the blocks, and then the northwest, center west, and so forth notation. And so you can see the correspondence for LI East, that's Liebre Mountain up here, and PAC, that's Pacifico Mountain, and so forth. So let's see a little bit more about the protocols, the methodology. So each of these blocks is about 3.6 by 2.9 miles on the side. The full LA County Breeding Bird Atlas had 414 blocks, and so we're using 13 of them. So we're using just a few percent of the number that we used in the full atlas 20 plus years ago. So in order to do a winter survey, it's really quite straightforward in many ways. We really would strongly prefer data submission through Ebird. It makes things much easier for us. If you're not an eBird user, we'd consider other things, but we really other forms of sending in data, but we really prefer eBird because we can extract it and parse it rather in a rather straightforward manner, largely due to the heroic efforts of Ted Kyle, who's on this Zoom call. So the key things though, you need to know where you are in eBird, and there are ways you can do that. One is to have a hard copy of a map. Or you can go to the LA Birders website, where, in particular for the Atlas website, where we have Google Maps. And if you bring up that website on your smartphone while you're out in the field, in a place where you have cell phone coverage, which is most of the blocks, you can actually see where you are with that with our website. If you're a little more technically savvy, you can also download a KMZ file that shows the actual blocks, and you can put that on Google Maps, Google Earth, and so forth on your computer, on your phone, or other software. You can use hard copies. I personally tend to do some of all of this. I bring hard copies when I'm out there. We also have PDF versions of each of the blocks on the Trial Atlas website, and I transferred those onto my cell phone. And in places where we don't have cell phone service, such as some of the mountain blocks, it's handy to have a look at those because you can zoom in rather closely and see features down to just a few meters. And regarding cell phone service, the only ones that I know of that are lacking in coverage are the ones in the mountains. And in some parts of the mountains, there still is coverage, but not all of them. So when you're out surveying for birds, really all you need to do is to count the number of birds you're seeing. You have to know where you are, make sure you're inside the block, one of the blocks, and keep track of when you start and stop. We prefer complete checklists. They can be point counts, stationary counts. They can count along some distance. They can count over some area. If you're near one of the block edges, though, you need to be particularly careful because there are eBird hotspots just inside or just outside some of the block edges. The easiest thing would be to simply not use the eBird hotspots and use a personal spot instead. That makes things easier for us. A little bit more about the protocols. Some of this I've already said, but we'd be glad to have observations obtained by sight and or sound. So if you can identify birds by sound, that's fine too. Incidental checklists. In eBird, those are lists that just tell you when you started but don't have a duration. They're okay if there's some species you're reporting that we haven't already got in that block. The species will count, but since there's no time specified, then it doesn't count toward the number of hours that we're hoping to achieve. And broadly speaking, when we started this, we were hoping to achieve 20 hours for each block. I think with a couple of the desert blocks, we may not really need that much. One thing, I don't think there are enough birds to justify it. Some of the other blocks, we've already vastly exceeded this. With each of the blocks, try to survey the major habitat types to the best of your ability. And you're more than welcome to just go to any of the blocks. There's no sign up necessary. Nobody, will get upset if you go into a block where somebody else has been surveying. We really would love to have additional help. If you find something unusual, rare, as always with eBird, please document it with photos, recordings, videos, sketches, detailed written descriptions, that sort of thing. And we do monitor the eBird data. Ted has been very kindly downloading the data about once a week. And once we do that, Mark Shiel has been putting it onto the website. So the latest results, including the ones I'm going to show here in a moment, are on the website for the Trial Atlas. So Mark put those up a short time ago, just like within the last hour. And we're going to do these informal Zoom meetings about once every 3 weeks. So I think, so this is the third one we had, if you include the introductory meeting. And we're probably going to do at least 2 more before the whole thing wraps up in the middle of February. And again, please pay attention to the block boundaries. It's easy for problems to creep in, especially block boundaries that are basically split very popular birding places like the Caltech campus. Also, it helps us if you could enter this text here at the bottom in your comments for your Ebird list. If you're contributing to the atlas specifically, just type in, uppercase letters, oops, LATA, and because we can see that, and that'll tell us that you're paying attention to the protocols. We're also parsing, that is, we're utilizing lists that from other observers who may or may not even be aware that we're doing this. But if you are definitely contributing to this and you're paying attention to the block boundaries, please put that in your checklist so that we're aware of it. Also, let's see, there was one other comment regarding the protocols, which I forgot to put on this slide, but please don't enter any lists. Don't enter zero birds for a particular species on any lists. Now, I suppose if you didn't find any birds at all, but you spent some time someplace, then okay, the effort is worthwhile, definitely. But if you have some other species, but say didn't find a house finch, please don't bother entering zero house finches. It causes some headaches for us when we're parsing the data. So let's jump right to kind of the big summary of where we are. So these are species accumulation curves for each of the 13 blocks as of today. So what these show is the horizontal axis is the number of survey hours. So I describe on the bottom left corner of each figure what we're showing here. So the number of hours on the horizontal axis, and the vertical axis shows the number of species that have been found within that block so far. Broadly speaking, our goal was about 20 hours of effort per block, but we want to test that. And so that's one of the reasons why we're making these plots, is to get a sense of, do we need that much time? Is that too much time, or is it not nearly enough? And based on the habitat and accessibility, it's becoming clear that we probably will want to have different scales depending on the habitat. For example, some of the high desert sites probably aren't going to require 20 hours, but some of the other spots definitely we want that. So, for example, during the warm-up period, some of us were here, but perhaps not everybody, we were talking about the Crystal Lake block and how there was an uptick in the number of species there in the last couple of days. So if we didn't have that most recent download of data from Ebird, we might have thought that the number of species there was leveling off. Except that if you look at the actual list of species, which I'm going to show you in another slide next, there were some pretty obvious things that hadn't been found there yet, despite the fact that there have been 14 hours of effort put into that area already. You never find everything with each visit, and so this past Saturday, Kathy Ellsworth and I went up there, and we found some pretty common species like house finch and Anna's hummingbird and California thrasher and so forth. And we ended up purple finch, and we ended hairy woodpecker. We ended up adding 8 more species to the block. So it's clear that we still need a little bit more effort there because this curve hasn't flattened out. So the basic idea is that when the curves flatten out, that's a sign that you might be getting enough time. So over here in Lièvre Mountain Northwest, there have been 2 or 3 checklists now since the numbers stopped increasing. So we're still at about 42 species there. And I think it's going to take some concerted effort to increase that. There are still some fairly common things that haven't been found there. Western screech owl, for example. Bell's sparrow ought to be there, and Naresh and I looked for them when we were there a month ago, but didn't find any. But then there could be some other things up there still as well that we didn't find. Now, for some of these blocks, like the Long Beach block, there's been a lot of time put in, over 80 hours, but that's partly because it's a very popular place with birders, and there have been some rare birds there, like the chestnut-sided warbler, and I think there's also been a Pacific slope flycatcher, which is rare at this time of year, and that's been attracting a lot of attention from people. Plus, there was a Christmas bird count there, and the count circle overlaps this block, and so that helped us quite a bit. So at this point, that block, although the number is still slowly increasing, we've got enough effort there, but we certainly be glad to have even more. The High Vista block over here, that one, the number is still creeping up slowly, despite the fact that there's only about 12 hours of effort. There are still a few things there that I think could be found but haven't turned up yet, and nobody's reported, for example, a savanna sparrow or a turkey vulture there. And the most recent update finally reported Eurasian collared dove, which is pretty common in some of the ranches out there. And so forth. So you can go through and see certain places where things have leveled off. Um, there are a couple where there's actually been a decline, and let me explain that. So the Pasadena block and the San Dimas block, both of those, the number of species dropped relative to the previous update, and the reason for that is that we realized that there were some mistakes. In particular, in the Pasadena block, there was a checklist from an anonymous eBirder that was a traveling list that covered 30 miles. And that's, well, you're not supposed to do that with eBird. In general, with eBird, please keep your distances if they're traveling lists to 5 miles or less if you're on land. And it's apparent that that particular checklist covered a wide variety of habitats that are not included in that block in Pasadena. I mean, the list included things like Townsend solitaire and a whole bunch of ducks that just aren't normally there. Um, and some other things. And so we, after we got rid of that, the numbers that we had to ignore that checklist, and the number of species actually dropped. Um, there was a similar thing over in San Dimas, I think, which is why that total dropped there. I think there was another checklist that covered a considerable distance. So at any rate, so this is where things currently stand with some of our blocks. And some of these definitely still need some attention. But there are a couple where we have enough, but we certainly wouldn't complain if we got more. Like the Pasadena and the Long Beach blocks. I mean, Pasadena's well over 150 hours of effort now, and Long Beach is over 80 hours. That's great. Um, the San Dimas block is over 25 hours now, so it's going to be hard to find more birds there. There are already like 70 something species there, but it's conceivable there might be some more. So if we drill down a little deeper, so here for each of the blocks, this table shows where things stood when we did the last Zoom Zoom update about 3 weeks ago, and where we are tonight. So December 20th is highlighted over here with these three columns, and where we are right now is over here. And so if you look at this, so what we're showing here are the number of eBird lists that have been submitted, the number of hours that have been dedicated into surveying each block, and the number of species that have been found so far. The ones that are highlighted in red are basically areas where we could use some more time. The number of hours that have been put in, well, we still need more. Some of these, there's still quite a bit of low-hanging fruit. The San Fernando Northeast block, there are 36 species that have been found there. And I actually looked at the list of species, and then I just kind of jotted down some that I thought ought to be there that haven't been found yet, and was very easily able to write down about 15 more. So that would be a good place to go. The San Fernando Southwest block has a fair number of species, but not a lot of time yet. That's a very suburban block, but it has a number of public parks too. The Southgate block, that's a very urban area, and it includes a tiny sliver of the LA River, and a number of parks and a number of just residential neighborhoods. The Pacifico Mountain block is, again, that's the one where I mentioned that the Bobcat fire had burned. Thank you for those intrepid souls who went over there and more than doubled the number of hours that have been contributed to that since 3 weeks ago. It's kind of a sparse area because of the Bobcat fire, but there are residential neighborhoods there, and you can find things in among those houses. There might be some bird feeders. There are still some fairly common species there that we haven't found yet as well. So at this point, I have a note to myself to switch from the Zoom over to a spreadsheet. So let me stop the share and go over to the spreadsheet, and let's see if this comes up. Okay, so Ron, can you confirm that you're seeing a spreadsheet?
Yeah. Yeah,
You are.
it's all set.
Okay, so over here on the left is a summary of what I just showed you, the blocks, species, checklists, how much time has been put into them. And then if you move this over, you can see for each one of the blocks which species have actually been found. So I've mentioned the High Vista, that's a block. That's the one in the high desert in the northeastern corner of the county where there are lots of creosote bushes, a few Joshua trees, and scattered houses. It includes parts of Saddleback Butte State Park and so forth. It's an area that doesn't have a lot of species, admittedly, but I think there probably are still some things that haven't been found here. Like I mentioned, savanna sparrows. There ought to be some of those out there. Um, Nobody's found a turkey vulture yet. It's conceivable that someone might encounter a spheruginous hawk out there, and so forth. So the list of all the species that are on this spreadsheet also appear on the Trial Winter Atlas website. And so you can check that when you're out in the field, or you could just print it out and bring it with you so you could get a sense of the species that we have found and then use that to guide what we are still hoping to find. Um, so you can go down through this, and for some of them, the numbers are quite impressive. Like Pasadena, that's the one here under the cursor. We found a lot of species. It's over 100, um, and so that particular block is definitely done. The San Dimas block, I highlighted that earlier. Um, we've done really well there. There's still a couple of things there that we haven't gotten that are a little surprising. Barn owl, for example. I know they're over there. I've heard them over there at night, um, but nobody's reported one yet. And although there's excellent California gnatcatcher habitat, we haven't got a gnatcatcher yet. Um, the habitat for those is on the west side of Benelli, west of the dam. Most of Benelli Park is actually not in the San Dimas block, but west of the Pudding Stone Dam is. And there's a beautiful patch of habitat there where there are definitely blue-gray gnatcatchers, and there are previous reports of California gnatcatchers. I know there have been people looking. Kathy and I have been there and looked and haven't found them yet. But we would encourage people to go back and check again. So I mentioned, let's see, San Fernando Northeast. That's this one. That's one where we have, I think, 36 or 37 species. There are still some fairly common things there that we haven't found that ought to be around. I know there are red-shouldered hawks there. There ought to be song sparrows there. Just a bunch of things. There are some houses in there that could have good old house sparrows. There were bell sparrows there, resident species. So if you walk along, for example, if you go to Bear Divide and walk along, actually right at Bear Divide, you can sometimes hear bell sparrows. I've heard them there. Or if you walk along some of the dirt roads that radiate out from Bear Divide, you can find, especially if you go off to the northeast, that area has a lot of bell sparrows. I've been out there before a couple of times and heard many there. So I think with that, I will go back to the PowerPoint. And so yeah, as I mentioned before, we had to toss some problematic checklists, like that one that covered 50 kilometers, which is about 30 miles. There have been a couple of others like that. So again, please don't do checklists that go more than 5 miles. That causes trouble. Now, a topic that came up in the last Zoom meeting, and one that Kathy reminded me that we need to bring up this time, is that we are now into the breeding season for several species, at least several. And so although we're not specifically doing a breeding bird atlas yet, it's never too early to start getting some practice with the breeding codes that Ebird provides. For example, great horned owl, hummingbirds, LeConte and California thrashers, and Hutton's vireos, they are all courting, nesting. I mean, I found an Allen's hummingbird nest at JPL last week. Great horned owl in my neighborhood have been duetting for quite a while. Been hearing that a lot. In fact, I heard two of them at JPL when I was leaving work this evening. And so if you notice evidence of breeding, please in your eBird list, please note it. There's a little thing you can toggle to select that. and to start getting some practice with that. Because when we do the breeding part of the atlas later, full atlas, that is something we would be paying a lot of attention to. So, um, yeah, these were some hot spots that had some problems. We used some of the Christmas counts. They were very helpful to us. And there's our trial winter atlas website. So I think with this, I'm going to stop the share on this, and I want to briefly um, bring up the the website we have, just to remind people what that looks like. So this is the website, and if you scroll down, it talks about it talks about some of the protocols, and then it shows the maps. So these maps here, you can zoom in on them. This is one that shows a view with the roads, and this is a view with satellite view and also the roads. And the satellite view is particularly useful because you can zoom in tremendously and see individual houses easily, for example. And when you zoom in, um, it will also, with these big blue markers, show you where there are existing Ebird hotspots. So this is the Pasadena block that I mentioned before. And so you could continue, zooming in to see different things. So this is the Lower Arroyo Park right here. Let's see. Arlington Garden is right there. There are over 100 eBird lists there, although I think only a few for the trial winter atlas. And then there's the Caltech hotspot. And as it turns out, the block boundary splits the Caltech campus pretty much evenly. So the west side of Caltech is within the block, the east side is not. So if you're going to enter birds from Caltech, it's probably best if you just ignore the hotspot and put in a personal spot instead. That way there won't be any ambiguity. And please pay attention to the block boundaries. So again, if you poke around on the website, you can see all this. And if you're out in the field with a smartphone, you can bring up our website and then bring up this map. And if while you're in the field, you click on that thing up there, it will actually enlarge the map on your phone. And then it will actually show you where you are within each one of these blocks. There'll be a little blue thing that runs around. Now, it turns out that with my computer, if I click on this, it's going to pop up another window. We discovered in a previous Zoom meeting that it won't be visible to you, although it'll be visible to me on my computer here. So I'm not going to do that. But if you're out in the field with a phone and you click on that little symbol right there, it'll enlarge this map. And if you zoom in, it'll show you where you are relative to all of these things, so you can tell.
And Lance, after you click on that little thing, it will sometimes ask you, open in app at the bottom. And you should say yes, and that'll put it on your Google Maps app instead of on your Chrome or whatever
Right. And
you're
so
using.
that assumes that you have a Google Map app installed on your phone. If
Right,
you don't, then it won't. But if
right.
you do, it will default to it. And that's really slick. And after our last Zoom call, I installed that app on my phone, and it works like a charm. It's really, really nifty. So I think with that, I will stop. Um, let's see. Let me stop the share on this, and I'm going to bring up the PowerPoint again, um, in case people have questions about that, in particular about things like this, and see if we have questions. I see somebody put something in the chat. Let's see, Mark or Ron, could you?
Yeah, so we have a question from Naresh already here.
Okay.
For completion criteria for the atlas, do you plan to require some fraction of an expected list of species to be reported, or is the plan just to tie it to the number of hours and nothing else?
Well, when we set this up initially, we were thinking in terms of the number of hours. Um, and we partly based that on the protocol that was adopted for the San Diego Bird Atlas. And of course, I hope many of you saw Phil Unit's talk 2 nights ago, where he described the San Diego Atlas. And he said a number of things about their winter atlas, and their winter atlas protocol. Um, I think at this point, since we've already decided, 20 hours, For most of the blocks, I think we'd still like to have at least 20 hours. As I mentioned, the High Vista block, maybe that's not necessary. That's the one in the northeastern corner of the county. Pacifico Mountain block. Um, oh, there's a typo here. The number of hours here is wrong. Sorry. Oh no, sorry, wrong column. Yeah, it's correct over here on the right. Um, and for that one, we may not need 20 hours either, but tying it to an expected number of species, yes, that would be a more rigorous way to do it. Um, and that's actually the protocol that Phil Unit mentioned for the breeding part of the San Diego Bird Atlas. But for the winter part, they didn't do that because they thought that given the number of blocks they had, and they have more than Los Angeles County, like 60 blocks more than we do. It's like 470 something blocks. And the number of observers, they thought that because tying it to getting some fraction of the number of expected species is probably going to be more time consuming. And they decided to not do that as a practical matter. Now, we haven't decided on the protocols for the LA County full winter atlas that we hope to conduct in the future. That's part of why we're doing a test run, is to assess whether we should consider, something like this. Um, I don't know, Kimball, are you here right now? Would you like to chime in on this? If you're muted, just unmute yourself and you should be able to
Yeah.
talk.
Yeah, I was thinking about some of the additional issues that are going to arise when we do the entire county for the atlas. And so bear in mind that first of all, for this trial atlas, we're looking at about 3% of the 414 blocks. And so that's fairly easy to get all that covered in a year. When we do the real atlas, we can't just rely on hoping people go everywhere. We're going to have to assign people blocks and make sure that people sign up to do blocks. The other difference, so not only is there like 30 times as many blocks to do, but if we do it for 5 years, which is what we anticipate, we want to make sure there's coverage in more than just 1 year out of that 5 years in each block. So if you saw Phil's talk, you saw that they really required that there was coverage in at least 3 out of the 5 years in every block. That's going to be a lot of work, obviously, but we want to do that because many species are irregular in winter. And if you just cover the block in one winter, you very well might miss an eruption of one species or another, or you might catch the eruption and it might paint a very skewed picture of the status of that species. So it's going to be a huge amount of work. And again, instead of just unleashing people to, hey, go out and cover stuff, which of course will be done as well, but we need to assign basically 414 blocks, and each of those blocks make sure there's coverage at least 3 years, if not all 5. And so it's a good thing we've got a lot of birders here because it's going to be a huge undertaking.
It will be, but San Diego pulled it off 20 plus years ago without use of Ebird. So if they can do it, we can do it. There are more of us than there are of them, and and with Ebird now, and so many people in Los Angeles County use it. I know we can do it, but you're right, it's going to be a lot of work. So again, getting back to your question, Naresh. I kind of think that we're probably going to aim more for a chunk of time rather than a fraction of the species, for at least for the winter part. For the breeding part of the atlas, I guess I would defer to Kimball again. I mean, we haven't really been discussing how we want to treat that with the upcoming effort. But I know that other places do that.
I would say, first of all, thanks for pointing out that we couldn't gather breeding bird data during the winter atlas because of the number of species that breed extremely early here. So that's an important thing. I wanted to make one other point. Oh yeah, the other point I wanted to make is when you submit these checklists doing the trial winter atlas, please make liberal use of the checklist comments option. Describe where you went, what habitats you covered. I mean, that unfortunately, Ebird doesn't require you to make any comments about your coverage, the weather conditions, or anything else, which is a shame because that's critically important for every checklist, and most birders don't do it. But for this trial atlas and the real atlas, it's really helpful if you describe exactly where you covered within that, what your checklist covers, what the habitats were, because that might help sort of figure out what still remains to be covered in terms of habitats and areas within the block. So, and it's always helpful to know what the conditions were that you were out there birding in. So in eBird in general, but especially for atlasing, please make liberal use of the checklist comments section.
Do we have other questions or
Yes.
comments?
Yes, William, to make it easy for lazy people, could you possibly provide an updated list of streets or areas and blocks that you'd like to be still covered?
Oh boy, that's not an easy thing to do.
No, I could see why it'd be useful, but
Certainly is.
that's hard.
So, I've been doing something that addresses that in my own surveys. It's a bit of a kludge, but it works. For example, Kathy and I have been up to the Crystal Lake block a couple of times now, and one of the things that we do is to look at the species that haven't been reported yet, and to see, okay, where could I find those? And so that's why we spent time in Chaparral on Saturday looking for a house finch or a California thrasher and a fox sparrow, because that's the place where you're likely to find them. But if you want to get a sense of where people have already been, one of the other tricks that I sometimes use will be to just bring up a range map for a really common species, say yellow-rumped warbler or house finch, and then zoom in the area for the block that interests you and see where people have reported it recently, like since the beginning of December, and then use that as a way. And I tend to hone in on the common species because they get reported in most of the checklists. And so that'll give you a pretty good idea of where most of the checklists have been. It would be great if we had a more sophisticated way to do this. But right now we don't, at least not that I know of.
Yeah, I mean, one thing you know that you could do, which you've done, Lance, you've done here by highlighting in red on the page that we're at, is highlight the blocks that need more attention. But yeah, the areas within each block, that's quite a bit harder.
So again, getting back to Kimball's comment, if you bring up checklists within those blocks, if the observers say something about where they went in their checklist comments, that is obviously very helpful.
Right.
Now, there are some complications there. Not everybody's checklist comments are visible. Mine, for example, are not, because I report some sensitive owls from time to time, and I make comments about them that I want to be visible to the Ebird moderators, but not to everybody. And unfortunately, Ebird does not give users the option of making their checklists hidden or visible on a checklist by checklist basis. It's either everything or nothing. So unfortunately, mine aren't visible unless you're an Ebird moderator. But I'm unusual in that respect. For many people, their checklist comments are visible. You could also, one thing I could do to help with that is I could put comments in another part of my Ebird list where you could see them, which I sometimes do. But yeah, that can also help. So Kimball just mentioned that. It's like, so if you're in the High Vista block and you say, okay, I went like down this road, or I went along this barren landscape that was burned to the ground in the Bobcat fire, and here's the desolate place that I checked. So that somebody else would know, okay, that's
Here are the 4 birds I found there.
Yeah, exactly. Well, if you look at the Pacifico mountain thing, there were 5 more species added relative to
That's pretty
3
good.
weeks ago.
Yeah.
And our accumulation curve is not yet flat, and even after 12 hours of effort. So, again, one of the low-hanging pieces of fruit there is if you happen to be driving through about 10 minutes after sunset, you could hear a great horned owl and put that in. And actually, speaking of which, I forgot to mention that in the protocols. So eBird divides diurnal and nocturnal checklists, and for what we're doing here, we're really the effort in terms of the number of hours and checklists that we're counting are for diurnal effort. But eBird defines diurnal as going, I think, 20 minutes after sunset, and also 40 minutes before sunrise. And so you can often hear things like great horned owls and western screech owls within 20 minutes of sunset, especially right now. Great horned owls are singing a lot. I mean, Kathy and I heard one 5 minutes after sunset up in the Crystal Lake block on Saturday afternoon. Um, so, or if you're up before sunrise, that's a great time to get things like canyon wrens and spotted towhees and California towhees and mourning doves and stuff like that. You can go out half an hour before the sun comes up, and then some of those will be quite vocal. So, other questions and comments?
Lily has very sharp eyes. And Lily noticed that on December 20th for Southgate, the number of hours is greater than on December 20th than for January 13th.
I made a mistake.
Yeah, I think you
Should be a decimal or
I
something
think
there.
you missed a decimal point.
Yes, there was. Okay.
Good. So now we know that Lily should be out there looking for birds because she'll notice all of them.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Oops.
That's okay.
Thank you, Lily, for pointing.
Lance, you just muted yourself.
Sorry, I'm in the process of trying to edit that. I
hit the wrong thing.
I made a couple of other mistakes. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Lily. Please look over other things carefully too. I'm sure you'll find more little glitches. All right.
Okay.
Other comments?
Susan asked, do you capture the GPS traces for the checklists? For those people who are on the app that keeps track of your GPS as you go.
I don't know if those are visible unless you're the person who submitted it.
They are not.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Even to the reviewers?
Let me check.
But okay, there's another question from William. Am I missing something? But how do we see on eBird past submissions that are not in hotspots?
Just bring up a range map.
Yeah, you'll get personal locations too.
Yeah, just bring up a range map, zoom in on Los Angeles County. So, I mean, you could type into eBird, yellow rump warbler, and then zoom in on whatever part of LA County you like.
Hey, do you want to do it? Do you want to do a demo, Lance?
I can try that. Let's.
Suggestion from Naresh.
Okay. So I will
Lance
try
go
that.
to eBird and look up yellow rump warbler in some block.
Right. So let me stop the share with that, and I'm going to share this. Are you now seeing?
Yes.
A website with
I'm
eBird?
seeing eBird.
Okay.
The Rufous bristlebird.
Yeah, not very likely around here. So we can go to species maps, and we can type in. Okay, how about housefinch? And it's going to show us everything for all over the world where there are housefinches. And now I'm going to zoom in. So I'm just pushing on the little plus button in the upper left corner here. And so now we're getting closer to Los Angeles County. It's still going to show purple rectangles because I haven't zoomed in enough. Eventually it's going to switch from those into individual eBird markers. But housefinches are so common, you have to zoom in a lot before it'll show you the individual spots. And there they are. So these are,
there we go.
These are housefinches.
Yeah, we've seen a couple in LA County, it looks like.
Yeah.
So it's having a little trouble loading though. So if you want to see something a bit more recent.
Well, before you get out of here, can you zoom in just a little bit more so that
it'll be easier, Ron? It'll be easier if I do what I'm about to do.
Okay.
I'm going to do current year. And so now it's going to show far fewer markers. And so you can, zoom around if you're wherever you happen to be. So here's the house finch that Kathy and I found on Saturday, up there. Then you go from there. You can zoom in, and see that okay, somebody's found house finches at the arboretum, and if you click on the marker, it'll tell you who it was
Who it
and when
is.
they found them. And I set the filter here so this is just for 2022.
Right, but there's also some personal
Personal
locations and
spots,
not
yeah.
hotspots.
Right. So the personal ones are these small red markers, and the bigger ones with a white thing in the middle, those are hot spots. So this is a personal spot from May Kwan over in Sierra Madre.
Mhm.
And there are, let's see, this is going to be a personal spot from John Rogers on the Altadena Crest Trailhead on the top of
Mhm.
Tenoble Avenue. Here's one that I entered yesterday,
Mhm.
right here on my street. So anyway, I hope that answers your question, William. That's an easy way to see where things have been reported, is to just explore the individual species. Looks like the more things we answer, the more questions we get.
Questions come
What else?
Quality problem.
Let's see. Well, a few comments. You could use the show point sooner on the right if you from Narash, if you want the when you're zooming in and you don't want those big purple blocks to show up and you want.
Oh, really? Oh, I didn't know
That's
about
what.
that.
Yeah, if you look on the right of your screen there, right above the
What, where it says zoom tool?
down, no, down. Still go down. Explore. See show point sooner.
Oh,
And
I
when
hadn't noticed.
Yeah, when you're zooming in and you're seeing the purple blocks, if you hit show point sooner, it will. I mean, it won't show them immediately, but it'll show them at a more distant zoom than they ordinarily would have.
Like this.
Interesting.
So
Thank
with
you.
something like house finch, you often will break that 2,000 point limit, so you still have to zoom in anyways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that it was 2,000 points.
And I checked, and at least through my review queue, I'm unable to find a way that I can see people's tracks.
Okay.
Oh, okay, great.
It's certainly not something pullable through the API.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Other
and-
other comments and questions?
Yeah, Nurit asks if she uses Ibird more than Ebird. Or, excuse me, iNatural more than Ebird. And I'm not familiar with iNatural as far as finding specific species and all that. Nurit, I highly recommend that you get up and running on Ebird. Ebird is so much.
Oh yeah, no, definitely use Ebird a lot. I was just saying
Okay.
I struggle with the mapping. Like with iNaturalist, you can search a specific point on the map where you are more easily. And I was just wondering if there was
Okay.
that option in Ebird rather than starting with the whole region and zooming in, but it seems like not. But this show point sooner is very helpful. So thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
You can come close to it with the app, with the explore options in the app. You can set your point and then see nearby records for a given species.
Right,
Thank you. I'll have to
but
try
Ted, you
some.
can only go down as far as county, correct?
No,
Oh, you can go down to hotspot?
I mean, it'll show you individual sightings just like this map.
Oh, okay.
And it'll start it based on where your location is, but you can adjust
Yeah.
that as well.
Yeah, there are lots of ways to display eBird maps. I mean, you can bring up bar charts and then bring up a map from that.
It's the explore thing at the bottom.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I just tried to do a way that was quick.
Yeah. So I just did the explore thing on my app. This is the great use of technology, holding up a phone to the a webcam. But yeah.
Hi, this is Kim, and there is a way. I mean, if you go to the location bar at the top there, you can just put in a location. It will zoom directly to it. So if you say Long Beach,
Dun, da, da. You're right.
Kim, you're a genius. Thank you.
Awesome.
So many ways to do this. Thank you, Kim. All right. What other comments and questions do we have?
With regards to the checklists and seeing checklists, I could make a map with all of the checklists spatially plotted. It's going to get really busy for some of those blocks, though.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, and that would certainly be wonderful if you are really, really willing to do that. Perhaps more useful for blocks that aren't inundated with checklists. Like, Long Beach and Pasadena are kind of swamped, whereas,
Yeah.
say, the Pacifico Mountain block is not, or High Vista.
Well,
I mean, if you were willing to try some of that, we would be glad to have it. But that's above and beyond the call of duty, Ted. Thank you.
yes.
That should be pretty quick.
Actually, in a couple of blocks, that would probably be very handy. And how about William to find that specific area or habitat not covered yet?
Yeah, and I mean, I keep mentioning the Crystal Lake block that Kathy and I visited on Saturday. Nobody has been to the highest altitude part of that. There's actually, in fact, let me show you that. I'm going to swing on up there. So this map, of course, is a regular Ebird map and doesn't show you the block boundaries. But so I'm zooming in on Crystal Lake, and the block boundary cuts off on the north, right about like that, and then it cuts off on the east. And I'm outlining it with my cursor. And so this mountaintop right here is at about just over 8,000 feet, and nobody has been up basically up in here. Up in here, as far as I know, and certainly not up along this road here. Now, right now, this road here has snow, so yeah, access is not for the faint of heart. But that's a part of the habitat that we haven't sampled yet. So I'm hoping we'll have a warm spell, the snow will melt, and then so we can go actually head up there, because there ought to be Clark nutcrackers up there. Could be, Williamson sapsuckers and and so forth. All right, other comments?
I think we're slowing down. Thank you very much, Lance, for catching us up, and thanks also, of course, to Ted and Mark. And
yeah, these two markers right here are both in the Pacifico Mountain block. So thank you, Ruth and Becky,
yes,
for going up there more than once. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I know Mark and Janet, you've been there. Kimball, you've putted around in there and suffered the exquisite agony of that particular block.
Yeah, that block is, first of all, there are only two paved roads, which is Angeles Forest Highway and Mount Emma Road, both of which have screaming fast commuter traffic early and late in the day. The other roads are actually all marked private. You can probably go on some of them, but it's a little off-putting, especially considering most people there are probably armed. And of course, again, a lot of it is burned, and it's got to take the cake for the entire county for the amount of illegal dumping of mattresses and appliances and household garbage and everything. So it's a just overwhelmingly depressing block that's hard to cover. But there are some roads. There's some
So everybody should go there.
You can walk some dirt roads that go along the power lines, and that's probably the best way to cover the Pinyon woodland. So I'll definitely give it another few hours.
Yeah, so if we switch over to a satellite view, so there appears to be some vegetation here, assuming, of course, not sure how accessible that is, but that looks like pinyon, maybe juniper habitat right there. And there's some more over here. I know that a good chunk of this section of Mount Emma Road burned, so I think this map predates the Bobcat fire. That's some very nice habitat there. And during little bit later in the year when spring comes around, it's a great place to find black-chin sparrows, but not right now. They aren't here yet.
Actually, it burned in the station fire and maybe another fire too since, but not the Bobcat fire. That was farther east.
Oh, okay. I stand corrected.
Like Kimball mentions, a lot of those roads, went and looked at up both driving by and on with the Street View on Google Maps. Almost all of them are marked private. So it'll have to be, that's why I wanted company to go check it, not go by myself.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Well, do we have any other last thoughts before we wrap things up?
I can see the headline right now in the LA Times, birder disappears on
Mm,
going
yeah. Well,
down
definitely pay attention to personal safety. As Kimball mentioned, if there are lots of cars screaming by, maybe it's not worth it to spend time there at that time of the day.
yeah.
The Mount Emma Road, if I were going to check that, I would check it like on a weekend, maybe really early in the morning when there aren't a lot of cars, hopefully, um, or just try to pick some time when there isn't, as much traffic. Um, Traffic has been a big issue on Highway 39 in the Crystal Lake block. There are just lots of motorcycles and hot rodders whizzing around up there. Um, so it makes things difficult in some respects.
Yeah, I've always done my counting up there on weekdays rather than weekends.
Ah, that's wise.
Yeah, on Mount Emma Road when Janet and I were there were people doing some target practice also.
Oh,
That made it fun.
Oh, okay. Okay.
all right. Well, thank you again, Lance. We really, really appreciate what you're doing, organizing all this. And anyone else? I don't. Well, there's nothing else that's popped up in the chat. So please, just as a reminder, you can go to our website at labirders.org and click on Science, the Science page, and we have a website, or excuse me, we have a page dedicated to this LA Trial Atlas. So please go there for the latest information. Ted is downloading once a week, and we're putting it up there so you can see the latest. Anything else?
Thank you everybody for tuning in and for all of your help with this effort and for all your questions and suggestions.
All right. Well, thank you again, Lance, and
All right. Thanks everyone.
we'll see you
Thank
next
you.
time.
All right.
Take care, everyone.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Happy
You
atlasing.
too.
Good night.
Good night.